Thanks, Andy. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're just on the cusp. I think Andy made it morning and I'm going to make it afternoon. So the talk today is on data privacy, and we've entitled it Keep Calm, but Act Now. And as Andy mentioned, I'm going to give a little bit of a basic understanding of who we are and why we're in front of you and what gives us the right to sort of talk to you about this subject, a background to data privacy, where it's all come from, where it started, and how it's evolving. We're going to look into, as Andy said, my digital lives, and specifically my digital life, going into actually who cares around the world about whether you lose data or hold data or have data. We're going to specifically then focus in on the UK and the EU. We're going to look at current issues, and we're going to look at future penalties. And we're going to look at the sort of initial sensible steps you can do to ensure that you don't fall foul of current regulations and future regulations, and that this is dealt with like any other risk in the business. So without further ado, a bit about us. So we are risk, security and compliance specialists. We base ourselves in the IT field, however we focus ourselves on business risk, and we're acknowledged as industry thought leaders in our space. So what we do, the main sole purpose of Blackfoot is to protect our clients against financial loss and reputational damage, and that can happen in a number of areas, and that can happen in a number of ways. But basically we're here to ensure our clients are supported in their risk management activities, and that they can make informed decisions based on accurate, sensible information. So what do we do? So basically our services fall into sort of three sets. Advisory services, which is like consultancy, where we're actually asked questions and we come in and give us some advice. We then move into assessment services, where in effect we're sort of testing the assumptions of clients. So a good example of that would be a client saying, I know where my data is, and we would come in and do, say, a data discovery exercise to assess whether the assumption the client's making as to the known locations of the data are as accurate as they believe them to be. And then the third set of services we have are our assure set of services, which in effect is assurance. So it's compliance auditing, it's card payment audits, it's ISO, it's data protection and data privacy. Now, how that sort of fits together, an example would be something we do for a lot of our clients through our partnerships in the insurance industry with people like Aon, our cyber risk reviews. Now, basically, this will start with a piece of advisory work where we're coming to identify threats. We'll look at the sources of those threats. We'll look at the impact and the probability of these certain threats and sources happening. We'll then prioritize recommendations. Recommendations will be mapped to projects, and projects mapped to timelines, which enables us to actually financially quantify the risks, one, the risks we're facing, and two, the remediation plans. Because obviously you don't remediate things at more cost than what you're trying to remediate. That's cost displacement, not remediation. So an example of one of the elements of a report you might see from us would be as follows, where we're looking at the potential asset under threat, which is usually an information asset, the type of threat, the type of likelihood, what type of thing can happen, and where we put it on a heat map. Where that then leaves a customer is usually asking the question, well, what do I do to get it from orange to green, or get it to the area in the graph in which I want? And that's where a blend of our services comes in, from advisory, assessment and assurance services. And here's an example of such. So some of the advice will be under best practice, which would be sort of advisory. Some of it's under loss protection and payment system controls and third-party suppliers, which would be sort of assessment services. And then the BAU controls will be the ones we go over and give assurance to that they've been handed over to the business correctly, and that they're not really going to get any problems in the future. So that's really how we work and engage with our clients, over and above just going in and doing single pieces of work with them. This is how over the term we actually assist them in minimizing their any financial impacts and managing risk successfully. So a little bit of a background to privacy. Where's it come from? So the first UK Data Protection Act was actually passed in 1984, and then that was subsequently followed by the EU Data Protection Directive in 1995, And as we all know, with the European Union, directives mean that the member states can have a certain fixed time to implement their own interpretation of this law, and our, in the UK, interpretation of that came out as the Data Protection Act of 1998. Now, the fundamental purpose of all of these types of laws and regulations are to protect the fundamental right of privacy. And this has been laid down in the EU Convention of Human Rights. It's Article 8, and as you can clearly see, it says that everyone has the right to respect for his private and family life, his home, and his correspondence. And it's correspondence where we all start getting into a bit of problems with what do we mean by correspondence, who holds the correspondence, and how do we hold it. So what's changed since 1984, or which I think is an Orwellian year, alternatively 1998? Well, pretty much everything. We've got the internet, where everything is now hyper-connected. We have smartphones, which we didn't have previously. We don't really have global borders anymore. Most of our e-commerce clients are trading cross-border, as are our retail clients. We've had the advent of tablets. We've had the advent of social media. We've had the advent of online shopping, banking, and online everything. So there has been a lot of change since these laws were enacted. So let's have a look at digital lives. How have these changed since the laws have been enacted? Well, here's a map of the internet. I don't know if any of you like the IT crowd, but the internet is apparently in a little box, and here is the little box. This is a heat map. The different colors relate to the different source countries of the websites, and blue is the states. And if we focus in a little bit, we can see what some of the largest current websites by traffic are. As we can see, there's no real surprises there. And as we filter in through and look slightly deeper into, say, the UK, we can see some of the UK's larger websites. If you're wondering what the red colors are, they're Russian websites. So things like mail.ru and stuff like that would be their largest ones. But as you can see here, the FT is slightly less than the BBC, and that seems to be one of our largest sites by traffic. So over the last 10 years, again, how have things changed? Well, currently this is actually this time last year, but as we can see, this time last year, Google managed to get in 1 month 1,000 million unique visitors, which is a lot. Especially when you consider in 2007 they were only doing around about 200 or 100 billion searches annually, and that's almost topping over 2,000 billion annual searches. As we can see, also the growth in personal data is just exploding, and has been. And this is partly the advent of social media. It's partly the advent of smartphones with the ability to take high-res video, and things like Vine, which have come out, and YouTube, which are enabling the production of vast amounts of user data. As we can see again, in 2002, only 9.1%, under 10% of the world's population was actually on the internet, and by 2012, that's now a third of the entire world's population. Another example of the absolute explosion in this is back in 2002 when Friendster launched. It had a huge 3 million users. Back in 2012, Facebook had 900 million. I think it's now over the billion. Again, we've seen vast amounts of growth in the amount of shared content. As I mentioned, a lot of this is due to video on phones and tablets being uploaded and shared. And as we see, this is in zettabytes. Now, to let you know what a zettabyte is, for those of you who may not know, it's 1 trillion gigabytes. And by anyone's stretch of the imagination, when I started in IT quite a long time ago, I don't think anybody ever thought we would get to be talking about zettabytes, but there we are. We are. Now, again, one of the explosions and one of the biggest changes recently has been the advent of mobile web usage, as 3G and 4G has enabled the usage of technology to actually transfer data at speeds which are required for it to be usable. What we've seen is an explosion in the growth of internet-enabled smartphones and the use of those is where the majority of the growth in the world is coming from at the moment. There are other reasons for online growth content. Recent studies have shown that this increase is due to the steep increase in globally shared pet authentication projects, or PAPs. Now, if you're wondering what pet authentication projects are, and if you're thinking they're sort of encryption, you're wildly mistaken. Let me give you an example. One would be cat bearding, and another would be sad cat. Now, I read an article recently which was saying that something like 10% of all video and photos uploaded and viewed were about cats, which I find interesting, to say the least, but there we are. So let's have a look at my digital life. So I take care not to put too much online. So I wonder what would happen when I Googled myself. I am a CEO of a business. Obviously, I have an ego which is larger than a planet. So as I'm sure you can imagine, I spend half my day Googling myself. Oh, I wish I had the time. Anyway, so what comes up under Matthew Tyler? Well, there's some LinkedIn profiles, one of which is mine. Apparently, I'm a wedding photographer as well, which if any of you'd like to get in touch with me later, my rates are very reasonable. And slightly more worrying, I appear to be a sex actor, which was news to me. Anyway, moving on. What else do Google know about me? So if you go to your own Google profile, you can see that they ask you a lot of questions. If you haven't filled those questions in, they start making assumptions based on what you do. So their assumption on me is I'm female, which if any of you know me and the length of my lovely blonde hair, I suppose is forgivable. 35 to 45, well, that's very kind of them. They slightly underestimated that, but that's down to my youthful looks and appearance, no doubt. They're not sure of languages that based on the websites I've seen, mainly because I view English websites, but they seem to know what my interests are. So I thought that would be interesting. Let's go and see what my interests are according to Google. So here are my interests according to Google. I was quite relieved when I read through them to find that all of them are publishable and none of them are not publishable, shall I say. What else do they know about me? So they know that I run 8 calendars on Google. They've also know about the amount of contacts I have. Slightly more worrying is the amount of Gmail conversations I'm having. And then even more slightly worrying is where I've actually signed in to Google. This is slightly old. And, though any of you who are in Nice for the PCI Council meeting will also have had a similar thing come up with France. As you can see, I'm an Apple user because you can see the platforms I've accessed Google on. You can also see, which I found quite interesting, the people I've most met in a month. These are all internal meetings, but Google also knows who I've refused to meet, which I should imagine would make quite interesting reading if you garnered that for most people. So seeing as Google allow me to, or show me, I should imagine a very, very, very small subset of the information they've garnered about me over time. I wonder what other information was out there. So a lot of knowledge-based authentication is based on certain information unique to me. And I was wondering, as I was writing this presentation, whether actually any of this you can get just as publicly accessible information, and if so, what sort of information could I get? So I thought I'd start off with the National Archives, but as I went to their site, it said, unfortunately, there are no birth, death, or marriage certificates to view online. Well, that's a bit of a pain. However, it says that there is some indexes of birth, deaths, and marriages, which is searchable on another website, which I thought was interesting. So I thought, okay, so if I want to research my family history using the General Registry Office, I can. It's a government-backed site, and they will enable me to research my family and family tree. The interesting thing is what they've set up is something called Free BMD, which is Births, Deaths and Marriages. It's a website. Now, if I was a commercial company who wanted to know all of the information in this database, I could, as they quite rightly say, have the index reference numbers online, but I'd have to pay to search them, and prices will vary. I should imagine the more I buy, the cheaper they will be by line item. But what information is there actually? So if you go to FreeBMD, you'll see that it's an absolutely free service. It's a .org. So I thought I'd type in just my first name and surname, nothing else, to see what will come up. Interestingly enough, I seemed to have come up with a few others, and it was fairly easy to limit it down to me. Here I am. Here's my mother's maiden name. Here's my place of birth. And here is my date of birth. 3 elements of information which are commonly used to authenticate me via a number of organisations. Now, if I was Robin J, the transcriber here, I would know who I am. So I thought, well, that's quite interesting. Who on earth is Robin J? Apparently, Robin J wishes to remain anonymous, which I thought was quite interesting, seeing his job is to de-anonymise my own information, but obviously respects his privacy better than he respects mine. The irony was not lost. So, seeing as all this information is out there about me and about us as a whole, how are organisations going to use it? Well, Tesco's announced about 6-7 months ago that they're going to use the information they garner on their club card customers to help deal with UK obesity rates. So basically what they're going to do is, if your club card says that you buy lots of cakes and biscuits, they're going to send you offers for bananas and apples. I'm pleased they came out and said that they would tackle obesity, because they could quite easily be pushing offers in a different way. So one of the lessons about having big data is that the uses of big data really depend on the decisions made by the companies who hold them as to whether this is a short-term decision to increase revenue or a longer-term decision to assist clients in becoming better customers and living longer if you cure obesity, and spending more with you. Your smartphone apparently can tell you everything about you. It has GPS, it has trackers, it has cameras, and apparently there's now malware which is coming out, which has been designed to take photos every couple of minutes and feed them back to whomever is looking at it. This would be a very, very good way of simplifying burglaries or physical attacks. But also, I think what we find is we all take our mobile phones pretty much everywhere with us, and certain places we take them, we probably don't want to be photoed. EE, this came out about 4 or 5 months ago. They decided to look at a pilot. So mobile carriers are fairly unique in the fact that they have very, very specific information based on our own mobile phones reporting back to them. Vast amounts of information about where we are, which way we're pointing, how fast we're going, what we're accessing, and what we're doing. And seeing as nowadays we rely more and more on our mobile phones, this data is only getting richer and richer. So what did EE decide to do? They decided to have a trial where they sent 27 million user data to Ipsos Mori to see if Ipsos Mori could hawk it out in the market. One of the people they decided to approach to see if they would like to buy this type of information, and the information was a trial where they took out, I think it was a load of people coming out of Oxford Street tube station, and they went to the Metropolitan Police and they said, would you like to know where protesters are within 100 metres? Would you like us to tell you who they contact and who their friendship networks are? We can also tell you their gender, age and postcode, and more importantly, we can tell you the time, duration, location of calls and texts and who they were to which the Metropolitan Police said, that sounds very, very interesting. Unfortunately, it hit the newspapers and everyone declined to comment. He said, well, it wasn't actually end user data, it was anonymized data. The police said they wouldn't report it anyway, so aren't we all lucky? We're also seeing in the States now, I mean, this was pre-Snowden, we were having the FTC chief warning that these big data companies need to respect consumer privacy. And in a leading statement, they were saying that the way personal information is collected and used by these organizations has best been an enigma. I think there is a lot of grey surrounding what people are actually doing with this type of information. Post Snowden, well, we know that there's quite a lot of tracking going on, and the capabilities for doing this tracking, if the NSA can do it, then corporates can do it as well. So we now know the NSA has been gathering 5 billion cell phone records daily, I think a couple of 100 million text messages daily, and a raft of other things, including backdoors into Juniper network, Juniper firewalls, and pretty much any other piece of networking equipment you could find. Monetization. Why is all this happening? Well, a lot of the services we take online, the model is it's a free service. So there's no cost to us in using Gmail, there's no cost to us in doing a Google search, and there's no cost to us in using Facebook. They are, however, incredibly useful tools to use and have massive amounts of value for us as users in sifting through vast amounts of information on the web and finding what you like, or contacting, speaking, and keeping in touch with your friends. However, there is a cost to these services. So these businesses need to monetize their services. And what do we mean by monetize? Well, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. So if the service is free, then you're the product. I think that's really where we're coming from here. And as we can see, Google's made a very, very good business out of getting an understanding and telling advertisers that it has a very, very good understanding of what I as a consumer am looking for, and therefore the adverts will have a better traction rate because they're not sending them to everyone, they're only sending them to people who should be interested in buying things. So where does that leave us? So there's vast amounts of information and ever-growing amounts of information being held by ever-increasing amounts of people to do with what they wish. So data protection around the world. So as we can see, to date, most of the developed world, the vast majority of the developed world, has had and has put in place some form of data protection. Is this changing? Yes. Most regions who have it are reviewing currently, and most regions who don't have it are adding it. So around the world, if we start off in the States, we have mandatory breach notification laws now in 47 states and counting. That's taken away the plausible deniability element of just sweeping things under the carpet, and actually should lead to a lot more transparency. We've also in the States got HIPAA, which is the healthcare records, which ensures that there is now a very large stick should you as an organization lose health records and the personal and sensitive information which sits around that. On top of that, PCI is now law in several states. In Canada, well, Canada's got strong data protection laws. It's their Personal Information and Electronic Data Act. The UK, we have very weak laws. We do have mandatory breach notification for a few critical infrastructure providers and public sector, but I'll speak a little bit more about the UK in a minute. Germany does have strong laws and has mandatory breach notification in several German states. And this is one of the problems we see in that our clients who sell across Europe have different rules and regulations in which they need to comply with, so that if they lose client information, there are differing rules depending on where those clients are resident. Australia has got a strong law. The Privacy Amendment, which was enhancing the Privacy Protection Act of 2012, it comes into force April 2014, and that actually has quite significant teeth. South Africa again passed a law last year, does have mandatory breach notification, and again that's got pretty strong teeth. Even China. So China in 22 enacted the draft proposed guidelines for information in industry security. It's not as strong as some of the others, but it's a very good start, and it's a step change from where they were. And Dubai has very strong data protection laws and mandatory breach notification. So back to the EU. Back to the UK. I don't think the UK really care about this. So prior to all of the rumblings about new EU data regulations, the UK government was actually being taken to court by the EU as a result of its 1998 laws not being stringent enough and not being applied accurately enough. Examples of this, the ICO fines vary massively. So Sony was only fined 3p a record, whereas there's instances of councils being fined £127 a record, and the largest one I found is a loss of a single record resulting in a £70,000 fine, and the record was a paper record which was found in lost property and returned within 2 weeks, and they were pretty confident nobody had seen anything. Also, 90% of all fines in the UK are a result of organisations self-reporting, and in my mind, organisations who have enough governance in to, one, know when they've lost data, and two, have the structures in to self-report, probably aren't the people we need to be fining, if fining is meant to create change in behaviour. If it's meant to increase revenues, then that doesn't matter, but that doesn't appear to be the intention behind this. So in the UK, so I'll take an example of just how silly this is. So here's a case. It's an actual monetary penalty notice, and if you go to the ICO website, you can go and view all the monetary penalty notices they've issued, because they're public information. This one is NHS Surrey. Now, it's care of Department of Health Regional Legacy Management Team, which is a bit of a mouthful, but there's a reason for this. Is that as this was going through, NHS Surrey had already been shut down. More on that later. So what happened? So the background: in 2010, the head of the IT team was contacted by an organisation who said, "We can dispose of all your PCs for free. The way we make our money is that we smash all the hard drives so that no sensitive information, but the bits in the PCs we sell." The IT team were happy to be saving money because the organisation already had an agreement with a company to physically destroy confidential information, medical information, and however the organisation the part of the organisation who put this into place wasn't informed that they were changing suppliers to a free one. Well, you never guess what happened. Those PCs ended up out on eBay without the hard drives getting smashed. After a massive amount of effort to try and get these things back, of which they recovered quite a lot of them and destroyed them at their own cost, the Commission issued a monetary penalty notice of over £170,000, even though NHS Surrey was no longer around. However, the good news is with the ICO, who based fines on two things: one, the amount of pain and financial distress it caused to not just financial distress, the amount of distress it causes to the data subject, and to the ability to pay of the organisation. Quite how paying early gives either of those two former objectives a 20% reduction, I don't know, but the good news is if you stump the cash up quickly, you save a fifth. So that's just a bit of an example of how farcical our current laws are over here. So what's happening in the EU? Well, Viviane Reding, who is the Deputy Chairman of the EU and also head of is also Justice Commissioner, so this sort of falls under a remit. She says that data protection is an absolute fundamental right. EU lawmakers are saying respect data privacy or face fines. But what do we mean by data privacy? Well, Blackfoot, we sort of push us into three categories, of which there is a Venn diagram and they do overlap. There's the privacy, there's protection, and then there's transparency. So what do we mean by data privacy? Do we mean the right for organisations to do what they want privately? We probably don't mean that. Do we want the right for porn actors' anonymity? I don't know if you remember my first Google search, but I'm hoping so. Do we mean the right for transparency in government? I think we probably do. Right to privacy? Do we mean personal? I think we do. Corporate? I don't think we do. And the duty of care afforded to the information somebody has on me. This information you've spent a lot of time and money collecting. It's valuable information to me, and it will cause distress to me as a customer should you lose it. So it makes sense to apply some appropriate levels of care and duty of care to that information. So what do the regulations and penalties look like? Well, currently they're quite weak and low and varied. Google have just been fined by the French privacy authorities the maximum amount they could fine, which I think was 150,000 euros, and it takes Google approximately, I think it's 3.5 minutes to make that. So quite what a change in behaviour that's going to cause, I don't know. So what do the new regulations mean? Can't tell you exactly when they're coming, but if we'd make the assumption that there's probably going to be more regulation rather than less over the coming years, this is what they're likely to mean. So we've got the fact that information is going to need to be organised. You're going to need to know where it is. You're going to need to know what information you have. You're going to need to know what you're going to use the information for, and you will need to have the data subjects, as in the person whose information it is, explicit agreement to do what you want with it. The first part of that was the cookie laws, which changed recently, which means that you now have a real pain when you're surfing the web, because especially on tablets and mobile, because half the screen is taken up by information about, do you want to accept our cookies? But in effect, it's going to be exactly the same as the current laws. So what will they involve? Well, there's talk of fines of up to 2% of global turnover, which would certainly get over the issue with Google only taking 3 minutes to recoup any maximum fine which can be issued in the EU. There'll be fines, more importantly, for the misuse of data. So this is moving just from losing data to not using it for what you had consent for. The ICOs in the member states are going to get investigatory powers, where previously they've had to wait for a complaint. There's going to be the right to refer. So if I, as a German data subject, don't like the way the UK ICOs dealt with my complaint, I can refer it to my German ICO to get redress. Larger organisations will need a certified data protection officer, whatever that's going to mean. Certifiable probably isn't the way to go. Certified probably is. And it's likely that mandatory breach notification will come in, as this isn't just being hit by EU data privacy. This is also being hit by the ENISA, which is the cybersecurity arm of the EU as well. So the journey ahead, what on earth are we going to do? Where do we start? What do we do? First thing to do, get a baseline. Find out if you comply with the current laws. That's a really good place to start. The laws in their intricacy aren't really going to change. The only things which are going to change are going to be the size of the sticks which you can be hit with for losing it or misusing it. So if you currently comply with your local data protection laws, you're probably in quite a good place. Work out what your risk is. So if it all goes wrong, what is our impact? Will it take us out? Is it manageable? Do we need to get it to a manager, and how do we get it to a manageable place? What's our delta? So what do we need to do? If we're not complying with the law currently, what are we going to need to change to comply with the law? Plan the approach, so create a risk treatment plan. So try and get quick wins and big risks dealt with before smaller and expensive ones, and then tap out the problem. So you'll have a load of information you've been gathering over the years which may or may not comply with the current law or the new law, but you should also be attaining new data and information on new customers. So our advice is to create a way of having this explicit consent for your new data set growth, and over the next year or two work out and get a plan for how you're going to deal with your current data set. Please don't wait 2 years and then have to deal with a larger data set. How do you go about doing this? So you're going to need to look at your consent models. In future, privacy is going to be all about the consent you've gleaned from the data subject as to how and why you can use the data you've got from them. So have we asked if we can do this? It's fairly simple. Risk assessments. If it goes wrong, what's our impact? Privacy impact assessments. So this is looking at it from a different angle. A risk assessment looks at it from business risk, the risk for the business and the organization. Privacy impact assessments look at the data subject. So what's the worst that could happen to the person whose information we hold? And then risk modeling. If you risk model, you will be able to get a guide as to the relevant control sets and appropriate data security standards which should be applied. And that could be part of PCI DSS, it could be part of ISO, it could be part of SAS 70. There are a number of structured frameworks you can go for. But again, you need to model the risk to work out which is the most appropriate. What you don't want to be doing is spending more money than is appropriate, and what you probably don't want to be doing is spending a lot less. What you probably want to be doing is spending somewhere in the sweet spot. So how do we start? So if we look at consent models, have we asked if we can do this? Why do we need to do that? Well, it clearly states currently in the UK Data Protection Act that personal data should be obtained only for one or more specified and lawful purpose, and shall not be further processed in any manner incompatible with the purpose for those purposes. So that's fairly clear that you need consent to process the data in the way you want. Risk assessments. What's our impact if it all goes wrong? And privacy impact assessments. Well, there are reasons for this. Principles 3, 4, and 5. The amount of personal data you may hold, it's got to be appropriate. So that's looking at risk assessments with regards to things like data retention. Keeping the personal data accurate and up to approach. Again, that's a privacy impact assessment and a risk assessment. What's the impact of my business from not doing that? And what's the impact on the data subject from not doing that? And then a retention of personal data, how long you keep it for. Again, this needs to be done via a risk assessment. The longer you hold this data, there may be a higher likelihood that you could lose it. May not be, but there might be. Risk modelling, guiding control sets and data security standards. So the Data Protection Act states that appropriate technical and organisational measures should be taken against unlawful or unauthorised processing of personal data, against accidental loss, destruction or damage to that personal data. So that's fairly clear as to you can pick your own appropriate standard, and that should be based on the level of risk you have, which is why risk modelling is a very good place to start. If you do lose data, good news is you can send your completed form to the ICO at the moment, casework at with the DPA breach notification form, and they will kindly inform you about how much you need to pay them. If you're not a telco, an ISP or the public sector, you do still have the ability not to tell them. What's going to be the impact on information security moving forward? Well, as the value of the information increases, this has to mirror the increase in regulation and the increase in security. It's the economics of data security or information security. The more valuable the information is, or the more scarce it is, the higher the value of that information to others, and therefore the more time they will take trying to appropriate that information. Where will it all end? Well, as we've seen in the public sector, we've probably had a little bit more experience in having to notify breaches and everything. They end up reducing the liability of what is inevitable data loss. So there's a lot of things we can do to secure our networks, to secure our information, but at the end of the day, it's very difficult to stop senior executives leaving laptops on trains or pieces of paper in places. And I heard from a very senior guy in the NHS, he said it's like snakes on a plane, laptops on a train. There's only so much you can do. Sooner or later, if you have 25,000 staff with laptops out there, one of those laptops is going to get lost, and it's likely to be the one with the weakest encryption on. So get ready, it's going to happen, manage it. How can we help? Well, we've produced over the last couple of years a couple of data protection guides for the executive, which are on the site. As you can see, we've been sort of going on about this for a while now. As to the actual dates when all this is going to come in, we don't know, but what we're able to do with our customers is at least get the accretion of data, as in the new data they're collecting, in the right sort of shape, so that at least their problem isn't growing. If you've got a client with a support and you've got any problems with this, please just call us. If you're not supported by a client, call us, and if you're not a client, call us anyway. We're happy to help.